Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Philip Preston, and I would like to welcome you to today's Webinar Express, organised by CIM Greater London. Before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few things so you know how the event will work and how to participate in the Q&A session. The presentation will last for approximately 30 to 35 minutes, followed by a short 10 to 15-minute Q&A session. You'll be able to post any questions you have by typing into the question chat box in the control panel, which you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen if you're watching on a laptop, or on the top or bottom if you're watching on a tablet or smartphone. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll attempt to answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end. We have two co-presenters today, so if your question is for one of them, either Martin or Bede, that's spelled B-E-D-E, please add their name when you type into the question box. If you look in the handout section, you'll find a copy of the slide deck along with a list of additional reading resources to complement today's presentation. If you want to share your thoughts on social media, we're using the hashtag CIM events. Finally, the webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand in a few days' time on the CIM Greater London webpage and CIM YouTube channel. So I'd now like to hand over to Martin Fearn and Bede Brosnan from Gazing Performance Systems, who are our guest speakers today. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Phil. And thanks very much for the invitation and the introduction. Appreciate the opportunity presented through CIM here in the Webinar Express to come and talk to everyone. And thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. My name is Martin Fearn. I'm here with my colleague Bede today, and we're going to spend the next 30 to 35 minutes talking to you about a subject that, well, we started focusing on this about 20 years ago as an organization working in training in businesses and a number of other areas I'll tell you about in a minute. But certainly over the last 12 months, if people hadn't thought about what it feels like to be under pressure and how to get going again or start to think about how you do well under pressure, they certainly probably have now. It's in the news almost every day. The concept of pressure and specifically the impact on people's mentality and mindsets. So that's what we're going to spend the next 30-35 minutes talking about. We'd be delighted to get some questions from you at the end as we share our perspective on, I'd say two things that we're going to try and cover. One of them is how do you help people get really better at what they do, but also how do you sometimes it's just about getting going again and being okay in terms of the pressure and the environment that you're in, the pressure of the environment that you're in. So just a little introduction to Gazing. We typically work across a range of sectors, business being the one where we've done most of our work, but also in sport and in education, in healthcare and where the military and with the police. You'll see some of the clients and some of the organizations that work and use exactly what you're going to go through today. So whether you are a teacher or a student in a number of schools that we've worked in, or whether you're a doctor or nurse in some of the establishments at the NHS we work with, or whether you're a member of the All Blacks organisation, the team that's sort of won 2 World Cups most recently, you'll be getting to see the same concept that they use to work with their mentality, plus multiple business organisations that you can see. So with that in mind, as you start to think about how do people do well under pressure, how do you sort of get going again or keep going, or how do you really perform to the highest possible level? I'm going to sort of start to position that in the context of thinking clearly, which is the theme, and the role that thinking clearly plays in the ability to access those things that matter when it comes to performance and getting going, but also the connection, and we'll try and make a connection to the impact of marketing and brilliant marketing connecting to the impact that mindset has on how people do well under pressure. And we'll take a perspective from your own view as listening and participating in the webinar today, but we'll also try and take a perspective from your customers, your future clients, your existing clients, those people that you're sort of looking to target with your services and products. And a good starting point when it comes to performance is to first of all acknowledge the pressure. Normally we would sort of ask people to share where they feel pressure and the impact that pressure has on them. There's a lot of you on the webinar today, and so we're going to make a bit of a stab at some of the sources that pressure might be creating pressure for you. The very obvious area of adapting to the significant change that we've all experienced over the last 12 months. And the need to adapt to that change, the way we live, the way we work, the way we interact with people close to us and also people that we've never met. Adjusting to the markets. For those of you who are in industries and sectors, the sector will have changed. There will be new people arriving. There's new innovations. Those can sort of create pressure. New people arriving. The pressure as often has been as a consequence of that has created these new innovations. The role of creativity's become more important. Personal pressures that many of us speak about nowadays, the motivation to keep going, the isolation of the way we've been asked now to work or live, and then all of the traditional things from family to everything that goes on with that, school and work, and those of us who've been involved in homeschooling, or now the fantastic release as many children went back to school, and the impact of just general overwhelming information as people try to keep up with the virus, or people try to understand when is it going to change, when will we get back to whatever the reality is going to be in the future, and the uncertainty associated with that. All of those are factors that sort of contribute to pressure. And all of you, I'm sure, will have your own stories around the pressure, how you feel, the people around you, how they feel, the impact on your organization, the job you have, and just generally sort of the effect that that's had on both keeping going and the pension doing well. So if you sort of take a step back from that pressure for a minute, a good place for us to start is to think about what you might put your attention on in order to try and generate that ability to keep going, that ability to get moving again, that ability to adapt. And often people talk about thriving under pressure. Well, that doesn't happen by accident, doesn't happen just because you wish it. And sometimes there's a real risk that organizations and people, humans, just succumb to the pressure. So when you reflect at that, we sort of have a way of breaking the ability to move down to three buckets, three areas of focus. And one of those, and you have heard, there's been a lot of advice in the last 12 months that will actually allows people to support their ability to get going, which is the sort of structures that exist, the process that people use to work, to live, the sort of routines that support that. That's the first stage. What routines do you put in place? And there's a lot of advice about how do you re-establish or reset the routines. And that includes both our physical health as well as the work we do and all those areas. But structures aren't enough without specific skills. So what sort of skills do we need to establish the ability to move forward? Are they the same skills that we've always had, or have we had to learn new skills? Is there in fact different skills that are now critical to us in terms of the way we live or the way we work? And finally, the area that the sort of third bucket, the third leg of the stool of being able to do well under pressure, to being able to adapt, potentially start moving again, is mindset. And mindset speaks about not just the ability to accept the discomfort, and we'll talk more about how you set about doing that today, but actually to engage deliberately in it. And one of the things that Bede is going to talk to you about is how do you develop the skill needed to start to the mental skill needed to start to allow you to access the new routines, access the core skills, but be able generally to start to that movement to the right from, and you know, wherever you might put yourself on that scale now in front of you, whether you're closer towards the end of being stuck or whether you're further towards I'm adapting and moving towards thriving, whatever that might be, mindset will be contributing. And Bede's going to look at now at that mindset area in a little bit more detail and try and describe it as a skill that we can access and learn. Bede, over to you.
Thanks, Martin. So yeah, look, if you have a pen and paper with you, it'd be really good starting point for you just to draw that line yourself, and then put yourself where you think you or your organisation or your team are sitting at the moment. And the reason that's quite a good starting point is because it's not all or nothing. So just to have a sense of movement is really helpful, rather than thinking, oh, I'm amazing or it's a disaster. And when we're under pressure, sometimes we catastrophize things. So if you've got a pen and paper, just draw a line, put yourself on that scale somewhere, just in terms of how you feel you're doing or how you're performing. Don't worry about your results, just think about general sense. And then, you know, think about structure, skill, mindset. You know, you will have reset things that you're doing. You'll be trying to focus on stuff that's familiar. You know, looking after yourself is really important. And then as you're executing your jobs, you know, or even at home, what can we do the same? What do we have to do differently? And what can we do better in this context? So, you know, you put a lot of attention on that. And there's been a lot of talk about mindset and the impact of the pressure and the changes that have been going on in the context we're in, and how it's affecting people's mindset. So one of the messages today is around how do you accept, you know, when it's a bit tough, and then engage deliberately in it. And, you know, if you step back and you think about a sports team or an orchestra or anybody who's performing, corporates, business teams, we put an awful lot of attention on systems and processes, and we train our skills. And mindset tends to get treated differently. It's often treated as a problem, or it's treated as a, you know, something to go away and work on your coping mechanisms. Today, we're just trying to look at it from one perspective, which is, you know, connected to that word practice. And so we're going to treat it like a skill. So if you just think about which one of these is most important to you and your job and what you do, you know, they'll all be important. Often people gravitate to mindset being the most important, but we don't really know how to practice it. So let's talk about that. Most skills will have one big idea behind it. So we want to work out, okay, what's the main thing that everything else flows from in terms of mindset? So if you take your pen and paper, we'll just tease that out now. What I'd like you to do is just draw 3 circles across your page. And it's really important that you do this rather than just think about it. And what I'd like you to do in that left-hand circle is just list all of the things that you think you can't control. So in what context? Well, over to you. You can do it around your life, or, you know, today, or a specific situation at work, or, you know, a big thing coming up in the near future, or a family situation. Up to you, whatever context you want. Just make a list of the things that you feel like you can't control. You might want more time on that, but obviously on the far right-hand side, if you're ready to move there, list the things, not necessarily that you do control, but what you can control. So, you know, you think about it, and you can't control when the virus ends and all that sort of stuff. So what can you do? And it's really important, again, to write it down, so it's staring back at you on the paper. Now there's a middle circle, which is about influence. I won't go into that, and I won't ask you to do that now. But this little exercise is really just a way to illustrate what mental skill is about. Because everybody knows this story, it's logical, and it's easy to talk about when you step back during lunchtime and you're on a conference call. But when you're in the heat of the moment, or when the pressure's getting too much, or you're in a new situation, more often than not, all of our energy and our attention goes into that red circle, you know, stuff we can't control. So even though everybody talks about it, and logically we know that we shouldn't do that, and we say to ourselves, well, I'm going to focus on what I can control, that's not what happens. Sometimes our default position is to, you know, get caught up in it, try and change the impossible. So put a lot of attention on things that just, you know, have no, you know, it's not really within our remit or our control, or we get caught up in what other people are doing, all of that sort of stuff that you've written. It's normal that sort of becomes a magnet for how we feel and our attention. So even though logically we know this, and it's a well-told story, I want to focus on the controllables, most humans, when they're in genuine pressure, don't do it. So the heart of the skill for mentality is about recognizing when you're getting caught up in stuff you can't control. Now, it sounds easy and really obvious, but that's what we lose sight of. We lose sight of the clarity or the difference between things we actually do or don't control, or can or can't control. And that's either because we're not being honest with ourselves, or we've just got these default positions that we like to go to, or we haven't prepared well enough for things that we know are going to come at us. So the skill is about recognition, that's the heart of it, and then it's about, okay, shifting. So even though you go there, everybody moves back. So drawing that line, you put yourself somewhere on that scale, because you won't be new to doing this. Today, you would have got caught up in stuff and you would have got yourself back on track. So at the heart of this performance under pressure idea and clear thinking, very obvious, but the number one thing is about where your attention goes, because everything else follows from that, how you feel, and therefore, what you do and how you act and how you speak to others and all that sort of stuff. So how do you get some control over your attention? So just to help us do that, and you think about the skill of recognizing when you're losing control and getting some movement, we've just got this little picture that helps. We call it a map. And it's, first of all, it just says that, okay, you can control your attention. You're in charge of that. You've got a limited amount. It's a big old computer, your brain, but really you can only think about one thing at a time. So it's about recognizing where your attention's going. So we just got this little dichotomy. It's quite binary and it's very simple and it's deliberate. It just says you either got your attention on task or it's not. It's diverted somewhere else. And we call that red to blue. The characteristics of what goes on in your head are different between those two states. So when you've got yourself caught up in things you can't control, usually it's a very busy space. So you'll see in that little picture, if you recognize these two heads, when we're caught up in stuff we can't control, or in the red side, which we call it, there's a lot of dialogue going on. It's either, I can do it, get on with it, oh, don't worry about it, don't think about this, just get on with it. And there's another little voice going, oh, you can't do it, oh, I don't want to do it, I shouldn't have to do it, someone else's job. So it's a busy old space. And typically, when you're in the red, you're caught up in stuff that's already happened, or you're worrying unhelpfully about what's about to happen. So hopefully it's sort of a familiar picture. When we're engaged or connected and just sort of doing it, there's less going on. We're just fully immersed in the task. And that really comes from having clarity around what to do in specific situations. Now, the reason this picture helps is because you go back to the skill. It's, if you want to do well at something, you want to do better, it doesn't mean you'll be absolute disaster. If you're in the red, it doesn't mean you fail or you stop. But you're more likely to do well, to engage with other people, to focus on your jobs, to shift your attention between different jobs, family and work, and all of that stuff. If you've got a blue head on you. And that comes from being really clear, zooming out when you're under pressure, and just being really clear about, okay, what do I do in this situation? So it's a helpful little map just to help you recognize when you're going there, to recognize when other people are going there. And what it does for me and for others who use it is it normalizes it. So rather than saying, don't think about this, don't be under pressure, just says, okay, that's where I am. So, keeping your head where your feet are is what the blue's about, but, telling yourself not to go in the red is ridiculous. It's like saying, don't be in this room that you're already in. So what this little map does, just says normalizes it. It's not a disaster or catastrophe, but it's not very helpful. So whether you think about this as positive or negative, we sort of see it as what's helpful or unhelpful, what's useful, not so useful. So in some situations, it's not that helpful just to be positive. So what do you actually need to do? So in the red, we get stuck, we get caught up in it. Blue side is about zooming out and then refocusing. And we'll show you a few techniques to do that in a minute.
Thanks, Bede. So Bede's just positioned what we're looking at as a skill. And the first sort of response to that normally is actually that's all of a sudden makes something that has been presented sometimes in a way that is less accessible, sometimes complicated, or even in a way where it's connected to the value, the mental health value of taking a big step back and meditating and calming down. But sometimes you don't have time to do that. And whether you are a student in an exam, or whether you are a motor racing driver on the grid about to set off at 180 miles an hour and you need to stay present in order to perform well around the racetrack, or whether you're a salesperson or a business leader about to make a major presentation, a business strategy or a sales proposal, there are moments when you haven't got time to sort of calm down. You actually need to just get on with it. And Red to Blue is positioned as an accessible skill in the moment. Be able to use it and access it. And the sort of question around that is once you've normalized the red side and the blue side, and people often ask us, is there any value in the red side? Surely we should all just be blue. But of course, as Bede just said, actually, that's not a realistic situation. Once you've normalized the red side, it can provide you with this springboard back to those things that are going to be most useful, most helpful, whether that's connected to just generally getting moving, or whether it's connected indeed to the delivery of brilliant marketing. How do you get back to the blue? And it starts, as Bede said, with recognizing. So this is going to give you a little opportunity to think about it from your own perspective. One of the things we like to say about the redhead bluehead map that you've just looked at is it's difficult to forget. And so you'll have in your mind now this concept of your attention being focused on the red and how useful it would be if you could get it back to blue. So just for a moment, and you can take 30 seconds or so to do this, consider the last time you were in the red. Think about a time when you know, looking at the map, last time your attention was distracted, you were feeling aggressive, or you were feeling very passive, or you just want to get out of there and escape. How did you respond? How did the response impact on the performance of whatever it was you were trying to do at that moment in time? And it could well have been sort of getting the kids out of the door, school. It could well have been preparing for a presentation or delivering a keynote address, or it could just have been actually doing your job, getting on with doing your job, or it could be making a putt on the 18th green. What could you do next time to avoid you responding like that? What could you do that would be less impactful on your performance? What could you do to try and regain control of your attention? So just take about 30 seconds to think about that. Okay, look, typically when people have a look at this, they want to spend a little bit more time on it. A couple of things. Sometimes people try and reimagine a catastrophe or some sort of disaster that occurred that really brings the red side to life. Actually, most of us will also recognize that the red side kicks in 10, 12, 15 times a day, depends what sort of day you're having. Our attention gets distracted and we need to regain it. We need to regather that attention and focus back on what we're trying to do. And just the first step in the mental skill is that recognition, just the acknowledgement that actually my attention's diverted and it's not helping me do whatever it is I'm trying to do at the moment. But when it comes to doing well, when it comes to getting moving again, when it comes to performing and executing under pressure, the blue side is where the money is. The blue side is where you'll deliver brilliant marketing. The blue side is where you'll make your great presentations. The blue side is where you'll execute whatever skill and whatever sport it is, or you'll be able to keep going and do the things you need to do. And that's where, imagine if you were at the top of this waterfall now. Imagine that there may be some canoeists on the webinar today, but even if you're not, you could imagine how daunting that might be, how much pressure there might be associated with the task of getting down from that waterfall. And they're there now, so you've got no choice. But the question is, what approach do you take mentally? And what we've seen and what we've come across and what we've tried to help people develop is the ability on the blue side to walk towards that pressure, to embrace the pressure, to actually move from red to blue, as you can imagine the particularly understandable feeling would be, and to be able to focus your blue head on what it is you need to do. Now, people are able to do that when they have a clear plan. as Bede talked earlier on about the need to be able to zoom out, take a bigger picture view. What is my plan? Where am I doing this? Where does it fit in what I'm trying to do? Once you're clear, then there will be a series of very specific tasks, particularly getting down this waterfall, that will allow you, if you access those tasks, it will allow you to retain control and execute the task of heading down the waterfall to the level of control that you can achieve. And again, you don't have to work too hard to imagine that the situation that you're looking at on the screen may well be uncomfortable, may well generate feelings of discomfort. And the reason that we persevere in uncomfortable conditions is because the task and the purpose that we're undertaking has a level of significance, a level of meaning to what we're doing. There may be someone on the session today who've chosen to run a marathon. Not sure why, but it may well be something that you chose to do. It's a long way, certainly, but you will have experienced feelings of discomfort. I think it's mile 20, but for me, it'd be mile 1. And the reason people keep going is because there's a level of significance in whatever reason it is behind you running that marathon. And people keep going and persevere when the blue side is supported by meaning, if you like, personal significance. So I want to now switch to the discussion of how red to blue connects to marketing, and ask Bede just to introduce a little bit of what might sit on the blue side when it comes to creating and executing really good marketing. Bede.
Thanks, Martin. So look, this next bit is just to link that idea of blue side and clarity to what you do. And obviously we don't, when we work with all of these different people, we don't try and advise them on how to be surgeons or All Blacks or whatever it is. So I'm not about to start doing that around, you know, the brilliant marketing knowledge that you have. But one perspective, just to get some clarity around it, so how to engage in this when your job's complicated and there is complexity, is just to zoom out and say, okay, what's the core principle here? So as you know, your purpose in terms of marketing is to try and influence the way people think about your product or brand or whatever it is you're trying to market to them. And, you know, as a good starting point, the big picture there is just to think that when people make decisions, and this is just the theory of decision making, it's linked to the psychology of change and, you know, different therapy models, people go through different stages. So when you know that, you know, your campaigns are trying to influence the way they think as they move through that decision-making process. And if you're engaging people at the wrong time or too early or, you know, too late, whatever it is, you know, people get stuck. So, you know, when you think about how to really commit and put attention on what you're doing, zooming out is just to think, okay, the end user here, the customer, is the main thing. How do they make those decisions? So like in surgery or in sport, just to be able to checklist that is really important. So, you know, if you think about what you're doing, you're just trying to influence the way people are, you're driven towards your product, why it's important to them, your service, what is it they need, you're trying to highlight that. They're all the basic things that you're doing in your job. You know, when you're under pressure, the idea is just to zoom in and say, okay, how are we going to do this really well? And that's what you all have been doing. And when pressure comes on and things change, you go, okay, what do we have to do better or different? So you will have been reflecting on that. In terms of the red to blue, it's worth just taking, you know, acknowledging, like we did at the start, there's a context here, people are under pressure. It's worth acknowledging that you can anticipate that your clients will be under pressure. So whether it's pressure to make these decisions or to avoid them, or whether, you know, people are really actually resistant at the moment or really distracted. So, you know, as you think about your core job, to go out and engage in doing your marketing and what you need to do, and as a team getting aligned to doing that, just to zoom out and think, okay, how is pressure affecting our, you know, customer, and how can we respond to that? What can we do differently? So you take away all of that detail, which, you know, is deliberate under pressure. Zoom out, go, what are the big things that we're trying to do? We call this a cross check or a double check, because when you're under pressure, you know, you've got to go back to what are the core things that you really, really, really need to get right.
Brilliant. So when we're under pressure, when we're dealing potentially with difficult tasks, oftentimes detail is critical. Detail is a critical aspect of that, but complexity associated with detail can indeed be your enemy. And at those moments where you really want to be able to think clearly, think your way through a task and an activity to ensure that what you're doing and what you're executing on is as likely to deliver the success and the impact that you want, then simplicity and practical simplicity can really help, which is why we've established this. Red to Blue is designed to try and do that. And as you can see on the screen now, the idea of the cross-check, just to reflect, just to cross-check where you've got your focus with regards to your marketing strategy. Are you engaging your potential clients, your existing clients, in a way that is most compelling and importantly most connected? And just as an example to reflect what Bede's just taken you through, look, are you in your engagement reflecting the upheaval that many clients have been through? The fact that they've probably been realigning their vision, the fact that their priorities will have shifted over the last 12 months. And this will not be the first time that you've heard that, but we've tried to position it in a way that it's simply and practically accessible when it comes to reflecting not just on whether your client is starting from the red side or focused on the blue side, but also what their attention might be on. And particularly when it comes to them executing their strategy, they may have shorter timeframes. There may well be that there's greater urgency as to what they're doing, or the process by which they make decisions around spending and investment and their operational processes, their operational side of the business has shifted. Those are all things that you can check. Now, we will be sending after the session or sharing with you the cross-check tool with some simple steps and questions to help you use this in a way that actually allows you, when you've got your attention on the blue side, what are some of the questions I can just ask of myself, to validate where we are. It'll be loaded for you. Sorry, it's loaded for you now to have a look at, so you can start to use the cross-check as a way to support it. But to bring it all the way back to what we said at the beginning, and to bring it all the way back to what Bede and I have been sharing with you around mentality and the skill associated with regaining control of your attention, a good step, a major step forward, is to acknowledge that everybody's vulnerable to the red side. It doesn't matter whether we are an international athlete. It doesn't matter whether we're a student doing an exam, whatever age it might be, or whether we're just trying to carry out a marketing strategy for our company that we've just joined. We are all vulnerable to the red side. And recognizing that is a major step forward in building the skill, building the resilience associated with mentality and doing well when you're under pressure, getting moving again when you're under pressure. On the blue side, the ability to zoom out, to take a slightly broader view, will help you regain that control of your attention, and then zoom back in on the task or the activity or whatever it is that you think will actually start to move you forward and keep you moving forward in an effective way. And if the first sort of step is quite easy, the recognition, because I think you'll get a feeling for what that is, it is the next step that a lot of people find difficult, particularly when you need to do it real time. And that's the ability to accept that actually you need to release your attention in order for you to refocus it on something that's useful, something that's helpful. So a little exercise here we're going to ask you to all do now. You'll need a pen or a pencil, some way of actually, and you need to put your pen or your pencil into your right hand or your left, doesn't matter. But this is, again, like Bede said with the control circles, an exercise worth doing. And really grip that. So your knuckles are squeezed around the pen, really grip it hard. And what I'd like you to do, and we can tell whether you're cheating here, is to use the same hand and actually grab hold of something else, another pen, another pencil, a coffee cup, a phone, whatever might be there. And if you're really doing the exercise properly, there's no way you'll be able to pick up anything else while you're holding so tightly onto the pen. Then, of course, what I'd like you to do then is release the pen, and you can pick up the phone, the cup, the other pen, whatever it might be. And that, in a way, is a silly little exercise, but a very practical way of demonstrating the need mentally to release the feelings associated with the distraction. If you can release those feelings, then that start to regain some control of your attention, and you can start to choose where you refocus. That awareness, the acceptance of it, letting go of the pen, of the associated feelings, allows you to put your attention back on something that you've got some control or indeed some influence on. And to sort of finish off with a couple of reflections now, because we started talking about performing under pressure and the notion of thinking clearly when you're under pressure. And people often reflect on pressure as being unhelpful. A lot of the news you'll hear and read nowadays is about this pressure that's been created by the changes to our lives and the negative impact it's having on our mindset, on our health, and on our ability to do what we do. And of course, there'll be a lot of truth in that, and different people will be feeling differently. But what you will also know, and what you'll also feel at times, is that pressure can also not only be an inhibitor, but a catalyst for performance. Sometimes we need a little bit of pressure. And this is our favorite slide, the little boy on the bike there. And you can, even if you look hard, you can see the little plaster on his leg, where he's just accepted the discomfort of the cut on the leg because he's so determined to get the stabilizers off and to start cycling on two wheels. Sometimes we need a little bit of pressure to generate that movement forward, that sort of progress. And so there's a sort of thought around that. How can you be ready for that? Well, the starting point is just to recognize that if you are acknowledging the role that pressure plays, but you want to not feel those feelings that are unhelpful, then the more you resist the red side, the greater it is that it's likely to persist. It's a common saying, I'm sure you've heard it, what you resist persists. A reframing way of looking at that is to accept the challenge. Embrace the opportunity that comes with changing the way we live, the way we work. I'm sure, by the way, that many of you will have done that in your personal lives. You will have done it with your working lives. Just to accept that challenge. By the way, I'm not suggesting it's easy. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting it's easy. It's why we talk about mentality as a skill that's worth investing in, like any skill, to develop. But if you embrace the opportunity, if you can reflect differently on it, it'll give you a chance to get moving forward again, to start to access what might be on the blue side. And although Arthur Ashe is some of you will be old enough on the call to remember him as such a brilliant tennis player, he just has a comment and a statement that he made all those years ago when he was playing at the top of his game that certainly for Bede and myself and Gazing, and I think for me at a family level, just been really helpful over the last 12 months. Start where you are, use what you've got, and do what you can. And if the goal is to get moving, and as you get moving, you start to focus in on the quality and the impact of what you do, that thinking clearly is one of those first steps, because that thinking clearly can then release you to put your attention on what brilliant marketing might look like. So thank you for today, and thank you for the time. Really privileged to be able to speak to so many people about Red to Blue and share with you just a practical perspective on mindset and the role it might play in both dealing with the pressure, but also doing well under pressure. Phil, back to you.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much, Martin and Bede. So we're now going to have a short 10 to 15 minute Q&A session. You can still submit your questions in the questions box. And if you have a specific question either for Martin or Bede, please add their name in at the start of the question. Also, a little reminder, if you're enjoying today's webinar and want to post on social media, you can use the hashtag CRM events. So, okay, our first question is, how would you help someone who is in denial about the amount of pressure that's on them? That's a question for either of you.
Yeah, look, it's a good one, isn't it? Because what we tend to do is jump to the blue side and try and get them to not worry about it or not do it, and we try and give the answers. So all the theory says the starting point here is just to reflect, really. So you can't force someone back to the blue. So what you've described is pretty typical. When you're in the red side, it's like wearing a big sign on your head, and you can't see it. Everyone else can see it, but you can't. So what your job there, really, if you want to influence that, is just sort of be a bit empathetic and a bit of a sounding board and reflect. So no judgment, it's just reflect. So you make an observation. And one of the ways, if you're ever in doubt on how to help people, is just to draw that line. So draw a line. Where are you at the moment? And just try and get them thinking about movement. But if you tell people and you back them into a corner, you tell them they're in the reds, and people are going to respond like that. So you'll see on that map typical ways people respond. Some people get really aggressive when they're in the red. It's rushing too fast, going too hard, taking over everyone else's jobs. Some people withdraw, get passive. So we all respond in different ways. If you're trying to influence someone out of it, that's not within your control. But to influence it, it's just sort of to reflect, make observations and just check in on people. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is it's a cry from the heart, I think. How would you deal with job uncertainty?
Fabulous. Well, it's Martin here again. I'd just like to pick up on that last one because I think there's a correlation between the two. So one of them is about where people are denying the red side. The other one is about how do you deal with some of the uncertainty associated with either retaining the job that you've got or even looking for a new job, Phil. And they're both very real of the moment questions. And one of the very practical ways that we suggest people do this is the exercise that Bede took you through. So many people nowadays talk about just focus on what you can control. You hear it every day from people who are genuinely trying to help. What we would find is actually if you adopt, if you to do the circles exercise in a way that Bede described it, so actually make it a world lesson rather than a word lesson, it can become very helpful. So whether you are trying to help somebody who's clearly in the red, or whether you're trying to help somebody or whether yourself is actually worried about uncertainty, write down all of the things that are helping contribute to that feeling, that are making you feel nervous, anxious, angry, annoyed, whatever it might be. Just write down all the sources of pressure and start to physically locate them in the control circles. It moves it from a piece of useful sort of grandma said type word lesson to an active, practical way of helping. Once, Phil, you've got your attention onto regarding your job, those things that you can control, and I imagine it will be, you can't control the macro, sometimes you can't control the micro, but what you can control is the job you do, the quality of the job that you do, the approach that you take, the role that mentality plays in your ability. Those are things within your control. Then you'll be doing as much as you can do to either increase the likelihood of you keeping the job or increase the likelihood of you getting the job that you want. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, great. Okay, ready for the next question? How do you recognize the difference between something you can't control at all and something you can actually influence? Can you share some examples?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure I understand that question really. Because what's confusing here is that it's about recognizing that it's normal. So even if it's that job uncertainty thing, it'd be very unusual not to feel under pressure around that, not to have a bit of anxiety. So once you recognize that it's okay, I'm in the red about it, that's how you let it go. But when you deny yourself that and you try and get on with it, not worry about it, that which you resist persists. So look, in terms of, it might just be that one thing. So what you'll see in that picture is when you're overwhelmed, it feels like everything's out of your control. So it's really just trying to find one little thing that you can do well, and it becomes quite contagious. So you won't know if it's going to work until you try it. So there's no absolute certainty. There's no right or wrong answer about where something fits in a circle, and your demeanor, how you're feeling that day might change, where you put things anyway. So there's no magic answer, but I'd say get started with something just to get moving rather than fixing perfectly. That's how you just keep moving forward, really. I don't know if that answers the question very well.
Okay. Martin,
Phil, this is Martin here. I've got an example, if that's okay, because I think many of you on the call may well be involved in one of the things that creates a lot of pressure for people, which is making presentations. Sometimes it's presentations now, in fact, increasingly they're remote presentations, webinars and remote Zoom meetings. But sometimes you're actually standing on a stage or you're in a meeting room somewhere and you're making a presentation. And it's one of the things that creates a lot of anxiety for people. And very often there are things that are outside our control that will impact on how that presentation goes. These are can be things such as big macro associated things that are in the environment that you really can't control. There's nothing you can do about it. Sometimes they're micro things associated with the technology or your knowledge of the people that might be in the room. And that's a really good way of writing, as you start to do your preparation, write down things that are outside your control, but those things that are within your control, which, for example, is the quality of the presentation, the preparation you've done in terms of making sure you know the messages you're looking to do, that it allows you to build a level of competence up around what you're about to deliver, which breeds confidence. People often say confidence is the key. Well, confidence built on a lack of competence is going to be fairly brittle. But if you can do your preparation around the things you can control, all of that stuff around a presentation, then when a senior level stakeholder arrives in the meeting and you weren't expecting them, or when something happens, means that somebody isn't there that was supposed to be there, or the technology doesn't work, you'll be able to adapt and reflect what you should be doing, reset what you're doing, because you've done that preparation. So that's just an example of using the control circles as part of your preparation. Hopefully that helps.
Great, thanks, Martin. Okay, next question is for both of you, actually. So do you have any particular tips that either of you use on a regular basis to step out of the red zone when you are already fully immersed in it?
Yeah, look, I've been trying to get this right for 20 years. We've got these, we learn these, default positions where we get defensive. So depends on the context I'm in. I'm better at it in some contexts than others. It might be wiggling my tail or finding some sort of way to just break your state. You've got to sort of find your Happy Gilmore place. So practicing that before it happens and finding what helps you might be just shifting your body, breathing, all of those sorts of things. There's lots of techniques out there, but it comes down to practice. I was getting frustrated about the Google Class response of my daughter to having to do Google Classroom in the weekend with her dad, and I was getting frustrated with her not being so happy to do it. So I had to just let that go a little bit and just put my attention on creating the environment, we made up a pretend Hogwarts at home and all that sort of stuff. So there's no magic answer to it. You've got to find your own little way to break the state, but the starting point is to try and just notice how you get yourself in the red. So how do you do it? What's your favorite way of responding? And you might write that down. How do I go in the red? Where do I feel it in my body? How do I act? How do I react? And then choose your favorite ones to think, okay, maybe I'll try something different next time.
Okay, Martin, have you got any tips?
Yeah, look, like Bede, I've had to learn over the last 2 years, and I found it extremely valuable. And we developed with our partners Red to Blue in 1998, and I'm still working on the skill. But I wish I'd had it before 1998, because it really would have helped playing and at work and with my family. And the way that I've developed that I found extremely useful is to change the physical location. If it's possible, I'll go outside. Sometimes it's just about changing how you're standing or how you're sitting. But that's the first step for me to then start to take a broader perspective. So I find zoom out extremely helpful. I know enough about my responses to the red side to know that that's the time when I just need to take a step back. And it is I joked a little earlier about grandma's advice. It literally is. Sometimes it'll be all right the next day. The sun will come up and it will be okay. And it can only access that if you've got a slightly broader perspective. And then that allows you to re-engage in whatever the problem is or whatever it is that you're trying to deal with at that moment in time by taking a broader perspective. Very deliberate sort of shift from a physical location and then zooming out, broader perspective, and then back in on whatever it is you're trying to deal with.
Okay, great.
Look, the only last thing I'd say, Bill, is just say it out loud. Acknowledge it to yourself. This is how I'm feeling. I'm blood frazzled. Say it to your kids. Just acknowledge it. Let your kids say it to you. This is how I'm feeling. It's normal, and you'll find yourself having a bit more space than you had when you had it bottled up.
Yeah, I find screaming helps as well, actually. So if you're faced with a task which is you just haven't got the energy to do, should you actually look for meaning or purpose in every single task to get the job done, or do you just give up on some of them?
Look, wouldn't it be great if every task that we get asked to do has got a really high purpose to it, and every activity we get involved in seems to be connected to a sort of wider journey towards nirvana? The reality is we just have to do some stuff to get on with it. We just have to grit our teeth. And I think if you constantly strive for higher purpose, the probability is that will eventually become a diversion in itself. So I think there is a case, again, for perspective, and look at some of the stuff that you have to do. And use the control circles and say, look, there are going to be some activities. A lot of the red side comes from a breakdown in our expectations. We expect this. When we find something that doesn't match those expectations, it's a big trigger of the red side. And so sometimes just resetting expectations around some of the things that we get involved in. Not everything, and sometimes it is good to look for a higher purpose, a more significant purpose. But other times you just got to get on with it and get through it, and changing your expectation will just help you deal with that sometimes.
Great. Okay. Bede, any final words on that?
No, I think just recognizing that sometimes too your drivers change, and it might not feel like it in the moment, but sometimes you just need to put your attention on something else. And if you want to be content and happy, maybe it's about changing your situation if you can.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you very much. We had some great questions and some great answers there. So that's all the time we have for our Q&A session today. I'd like to say thank you to Martin and to Bede for today's presentation, to CIM Greater London for organising the event, and a thank you to you for watching. We do hope you found it interesting and worthwhile. Okay, our next webinar express, Driving Competitive Advantage Through Sustainability, is on Tuesday the 30th of March at 1 p.m, hosted by CIM Midlands. You'll find it listed on the events page of the CIM website, where you'll be able to find out more information and to register for the session. Finally, you'll be receiving a short survey on today's webinar, and we'd love to hear your feedback. It'll only take a few minutes, and all survey responses are anonymous, so please do let us know your thoughts. So, on behalf of the CIM, thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.